Hi, it's T. Michelle Birdsong at St. Francis of Assisi Residence 3 in New York City. You're looking at paintings by Judy Redinger. Judy has been Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States. Her husband was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And she has written a story. She's very talented. She paints, she sings, and she writes. And she has written a story called George Mullins and the UFO. And if I may, I'll share it with you. George Mullins, the local oddball, sat on the low stone wall that enclosed his farm in the Highlands of Scotland. He pondered the fate of his flock of Highland sheep. They were not reproducing. It was 4 years since any of the ewes had given birth. To all appearances, they were thriving in every respect except fertility. George had consulted many veterinarians and agronomists, but no one could explain his flock's inability to bear young. As he sat deep in thought, he had the feeling that he was being watched. He looked around but saw no one. Something made him look up. He was astonished by what he saw. A large, round, metallic object was hovering above him about 50 feet over his head. George's heart began to race. He was an amateur scientist and an avid science fiction buff. Through his reading of science texts, he had come to the conclusion that intelligent life must exist in other parts of the universe. He had always hoped that he would be granted the privilege of seeing an interstellar ship and its occupants. George looked up at the craft and waved. A small opening appeared in the side of the vessel. George could see something moving behind the glass-like port. He could just make out a small arm reaching through the opening. It appeared to be waving back at him. George began to leap into the air, waving his arms up and down. The ship grew in size as it approached him. It landed a few feet from the place where he was standing. He waited expectantly for the door of the craft to open, and after about 10 minutes, a portal in the side of the ship slid back. George felt no fear. Instead, he was consumed with wonder and curiosity. Excuse me. Suddenly, a diminutive figure appeared in the doorway. It was light green in color and had large almond-shaped eyes. It was wearing what appeared to be a spaceship made of silver gray material. George faced the being, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't speak. As the alien approached him, he noticed the color of its eyes. They were beautiful, a beautiful shade of golden yellow. It looked at him and came closer. George felt a surge of well-being and deep calm. It stopped and raised its hand in a universal gesture of greeting. George, his hand shaking, returned the greeting. The alien began to speak. Its voice had a strange metallic ring. It said, "English?" George nodded. Excuse me. For the first time, he noticed a box-like object that protruded from the creature's chest. The being pressed a few buttons on the instrument and began to speak. It explained, "This is a universal translator. With it, we will be able to communicate. Do you have a name?" George managed to find his voice. He said, "George, my name is George Mullins." The creature said, "You may call me Torque." Where do you come from? George asked. We come from a planet in the region of Alpha Centauri. We are on a mission to explore planets in this region of space. We wish to learn about other intelligent species. In the universe. How did you know that there were intelligent beings on this planet? George asked. We have been monitoring your radio emissions for some time, replied Torque. That is how we came to know your language. Now let me ask you a question. What kind of ruling body governs this region of your planet? Our system of government is called a democracy, George replied. That means that we are free to express our thoughts openly without fear of reprisal from our leaders as long as we do not attempt to do harm to our fellow countrymen. That is a very interesting idea, Torque said. George asked, how did you know that I wouldn't run away screaming when I saw your ship? Every thinking creature emanates brain waves. We are able to detect the general mood and mental ability of others. We found you to be eminently sane and fair-minded. George laughed. I wish my neighbors felt the same way. They think of me as a village idiot. Torque replied that people often misunderstand original thinkers. They fear anything they don't understand. Have you found that to be true? George replied, yes, I have found that to be true. But I am curious, what is life like on your planet? Torque answered, we have a very ancient civilization. We are ruled by a council of elders, the wisest and best of our people. They are expected to render just decisions. If they do not, they are removed from leadership. War has been abolished from our world. We have lived in peace for many generations. This makes it possible for us to concentrate our attention on scientific and humanitarian advancement. We are a very inquisitive race. We wish to learn as much as possible about the universe and adopt the best that other civilizations have to offer. We also wish to share what we have learned during our long existence in the universe. That's very commendable, George said. Torque continued, perhaps we can help you in some way. Our science and medicine are more advanced than yours apparently are. George thought hard. Suddenly he had an idea. I'm having some trouble with my sheep. They have not reproduced for 4 years. Do you think you can help me? We will examine your sheep and the soil of your farm to find the source of the problem, with your permission, of course. Please do, George replied. Torque entered the ship and was gone for about 15 minutes. When he reappeared, he was accompanied by 3 other aliens. George could not distinguish one from another. They seemed to be identical. Each of them carried a strange-looking metallic device. They moved across his fields, one to the east, one to the west, another to the south. The 4th walked in a northerly direction. They came together after about 45 minutes and seemed to be consulting with each other. One of them, whom George supposed was Torque, approached him. The results of our examination show that the soil on your farm is deficient in a vital mineral. If you add it to the soil, the grass will contain nutrients that will enable your sheep to reproduce. The alien then wrote the name of the mineral on a paper-like sheet and handed it to George. George said, no one in this part of Scotland appears to have this problem. Torque replied, no, the depleted area seemed to be confined to the land surrounding your farm. George asked him, how is it possible The agronomists I consulted could not discover this. Torque said probably because our agronomy has had the accumulated knowledge of many millennia. George told the alien that he was profoundly grateful for his help. "What can I do for you?" he asked. "The information you have already given us has been very helpful. We are leaving now. We will visit other regions on your planet, gathering information that will be used to expand our knowledge of your species. Eventually, we will return to you to express more fully our appreciation for your help. Goodbye for now, my friend. We will meet again." All of the creatures returned to their ship. The door closed silently, and the vessel rose into the air. In a matter of seconds, it was out of sight. George stood where he was for several minutes. If Torque was right, all of his problems would be solved. His sheep would once again give birth and assure the success of his farm. The next day, George visited the local farm supply outlet and ordered the mineral he needed. The salesman said, "We don't get many orders for this particular item, but I think I have a 5-pound sack in the warehouse." The salesman asked George to wait while he checked his inventory. He returned a few minutes later with a sack in his arms. "Yes," he said, "this is the item you asked for." George was elated. He paid the salesman and returned to his farm. 1 year later, a government inspector arrived at George's farm to examine his flock. To his surprise, not only were all the sheep enjoying robust health, but all of the ewes were pregnant, even those who were past their prime reproductive years. The inspector approached George and asked him the secret of his flock's fertility. George smiled and said, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." The inspector gave him a strange look. George laughed. Then he walked away, humming a lively Highland tune. Isn't that delightful? Okay, that story was from Judy Ruttinger, who writes under the name of Julie Ryan. And like I said, she was Eleanor Roosevelt in a past life. And she's a resident here at St. Francis of Assisi Residence 3 with me, T. Michelle Birdsong, and the other residents here. She's a very talented woman, and I hope you enjoyed listening to her story as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. So long.